All right, so welcome to Cyber Tech at Risk Talks. Today we are honored to have Andrew Wertkin, CTO at BlueCat, to join us. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
Very good. So at the beginning, I just like to do a quick introduction about yourself, who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I've been at BlueCat for the last 5 years or so, both the CTO and also the Chief Product Officer. So I drive our product strategy and the teams that build our products and drive them out to market.
Okay, wonderful. So Andrew, I think you have a quite long professional career, right? So the journey. So I look at your background. At the beginning, you're not from IT background, right? So you're more on some interesting topic like a neuroscience,
Right.
like biology. Can you
Right.
talk a little bit about that? How that transition you to the IT or cybersecurity or the cool like technology
Right.
things?
No, for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, the one constant theme was always software, but yeah, I was pursuing a PhD in neuroscience and writing a great deal of software in the process, both back then with neural networks, but certainly around things like image processing, as we were doing a lot of work on neurodegenerative diseases. In almost everything I did, I was writing software and software and software, and I had an idea at some point on something I might want to commercialize. And I took a leave of absence from graduate school and never went back. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
so I never did go finish my PhD, but became very much passionate and interested in understanding complex problems that enterprises have, that businesses have, and finding ways that I can use technology, specifically software, to help solve for those. And so I spent a few years in corporate America, learning a great deal about engineering to manufacturing flows, supply chain flows, risk management in that process, and ended up starting my own software company in 1999.
Okay.
It was very much focused on supply chain risk.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things you actually learned during that time. You already mentioned neuroscience is basically your major, but you also spend a lot of time on programming, development.
Right.
And also you mentioned the risk management, supply chain, or each one is a kind of like an industry, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you have all those things. How can you within shortest time to learn so many things?
You know, I dive in head first, and so within a couple of months of moving into industry, I spent several months in Taipei at a high volume manufacturing plant for my employer at the time, and I dive in. I ask a lot of questions. I'm just, for whatever reason, programmed to be unbelievably intrigued by problem solving in a B2B type setting and understanding how processes work and how they can be optimized with software and technology and how they can be disrupted, quite frankly. And so I remember for many months in Taipei like a kid in a candy store, just finding problems and tapping away at the keyboard.
Right. Problem solving, I heard that words again.
Yeah.
So that's actually one of your passion to resolve the complex problems. Doesn't matter in science, but also in the product or development.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, and I loved everything about neuroscience. I mean, to this day, you know, how this thing works up here is unbelievably fascinating to me. The rapidity, like how quickly I can address and solve issues in the corporate context, was really driving a lot of my passion, and as opposed to potentially a body of work over a lifetime on the neuroscience side. Maybe I'm impatient, so I'm highly curious and highly impatient, and I like to just dive in.
Wonderful. So it's not just a focus on one person, it's many, many people together. As you mentioned, the corporate, right?
Yeah.
So large organizations, so many people, how do they work together efficiently?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think people, I mean, curiosity is, frankly, at BlueCat, one of our core values and something that I hold dear. You have to be able to ask questions and do your own research.
Right.
Try to understand on your own. Ask questions. Create hypotheses, and a lot of the sort of the scientific method has stayed with me through all of these years. And but you know, do some research. Be curious. Create some hypotheses. Test those hypotheses.
Right.
Understand based on what you learned. You know, does your point of view change? Do the facts lead you in a different direction? And it's the way I think about products, and it's the way I think about how we address the market.
Okay. Feels like it's kind of another way to address the innovations, because a lot of product development start this similar process.
Yeah, for sure.
So you leverage that one to the future kind of your product development side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I created my own startup, I had found a niche where I thought I can build some technology that would be generally commercially viable across many companies. But I looked for partners to begin with, and I found a large corporate partner who had this problem, who sort of saw what I wanted to do to address it, and I worked very closely initially with that. I guess I believe, now today we talk a lot about things like the lean startup, for instance, which are very focused on this idea of testing, and for me, reading some of that literature was putting into words what this is sort of the way I've been acting for quite some time. And if you can't get feedback right away, we're not making consumer things that consumers have never heard of before. In the world of BlueCat, or certainly in the world of my startup where I worked after, we have customers with actual problems that can gain actual value, and the goal is to find innovative ways to create that value for them.
Okay.
But the problems are there for the curious to find.
Okay. So you need to have an open mind to find the opportunities. You also have some curious mind to find where you want to focus on.
Yeah.
Then you also continue to test and to experiment your problem.
Yeah, you have to experiment, and you have to be confident enough to know that when you are experimenting, that the results are meaningful, regardless if they indicate you're on the right path or not on the right path.
Okay.
They're always meaningful, and a lot of young entrepreneurs I work with can get a little bit let down if their fundamental hypotheses aren't proving out the way they thought they would, as opposed to sort of seeing that as an opportunity to sharpen the pencil.
Okay, so attitude also very important.
Yeah, for sure.
Keep it positive, those.
Yeah.
So within your journey, from neuroscience students, come up with your first startup, eventually become a CTO. So is there any a most memorable moment? If you can share one or two story or things, maybe successful story, maybe also some challenging stories.
For sure. I'll give you one piece of advice that I think that I got that holds with me to this day. That was actually the general manager of this plant I was working with in Taipei for quite some time. Once pulled me aside. I was some 23, 24-year-old kid who at that point, as curious I was overconfident in what I knew and what I had learned.
Okay.
And he once said to me, he pulled me aside and he said, "Andrew, you have an answer to everything." And I said, "Thank you." And he said, "That was not a compliment." And, and it occurred to me what he meant. And sort of just from a the one comment that sort of guided my career since, it's just this assumption, it's not necessarily humbleness. I don't think I've been accused of being humble in my career, but just understanding that it's not a sign of weakness not to know the answer to something. You can't possibly know the answer to everything.
Right.
And it's as long as you're confident in, you're not snowing anybody, as long as you're confident in your knowledge of the domain that you're speaking of, and have done your homework, your homework, then it's perfectly fine not to know.
So it's okay not to know everything.
If you'll stop learning if you think you know everything, and you won't be surprised, and you'll create an environment where people are intimidated to suggest that you might be wrong.
Especially at your CTO role, right? So
Yeah.
as a chief technology. Right?
Yeah, no, I want people around me to understand that, and I believe my team does, that even if I have a strong opinion about something, it's not intended to disqualify any contrary opinion they might have. In fact, the stronger my opinion is, the more I'm inviting somebody to to tell me what I might not be thinking of or where I might be wrong in the process. I think that's critical. And so that piece of advice from, I don't know, 1996 or something like that was critical. From things that happened in my career, when my startup was acquired by a public software company in Boston, and I left a couple years after to work with the current CEO of BlueCat, and we worked together and ended up selling that company to the same company that had acquired my startup, and I joined as their corporate CTO at that point in 2011. And a year or two into that journey, I was able to convince the company to allow me to create a lean startup to focus on what this company can do in the world of connected products, of IoT.
Okay.
And that process was transformative, and it wasn't even that long ago. In my understanding, that company has given me access to some of the world's CTOs for huge public software companies like huge public companies like John Deere or Samsung and others. And the work and the innovation that was going on and continues to go on today in that world of what's now generally called IoT or industrial IoT is amazing. And I remember back in 2011, I was at a commercial vehicles conference, and I saw the vice president of software and systems at John Deere present, and he presented this slide that said, we don't make tractors, we make high-tech agricultural farming solutions. And these pictures of this autonomous farming equipment, and it just, the way he described what they were doing there was fairly amazing to me, given how far advanced they were in 2011. And I remember asking him afterwards if I could steal that slide, which is a hobby of mine, stealing people's slides, and then I'd use it in every presentation for the next 5 years. And I basically did. I basically did. That tractor slide was sort of the way I thought about industry in a very different way.
Right.
And frankly, one of the major reasons I came to BlueCat, where I wanted to move from a world of creating software to help enterprises build things like IoT solutions, to creating IoT solutions. And when I look at what we're doing from an enterprise DNS perspective, it's very much an IoT solution for our enterprise customers.
Wonderful. I can see there's a lot of insights there, valuable insights from your story, right? So one is curious about things, keep learning, and also try to disrupt, or give a different perspective. A lot of times those things also from your background is across domains.
Yeah.
It's not just IT, right? So it's not just programming. You bring different perspective, looking at the things, so you get a maybe different way to resolve that one.
Yeah.
So that's very important.
No, for sure. The more perspectives, the better. And both in terms of, by the way, industries, geographies. I've worked within a single industry like automotive across every geography where there's automotive parts or vehicles built, or points of view of people, and we have a strong goal and a practice of diversity, and I believe diversity makes for better decisions as well. So any way you can surround yourself with different points of views or learn different points of views are going to inform you in a way that you can build better things.
Wonderful. So it's not just about yourself or keep learning from different things, but also your team, right? So also you associate with diversified team to have that different points of views.
Yeah.
Then oftentimes you probably get your best idea from other people, so it sounds like irrelevant kind of things, but can trigger you some creative side.
Yeah, it's patterns. The more people you talk to, you recognize patterns, and probably if I look at my strengths and weaknesses, that pattern identification is definitely a strength. Yeah. And for sure, I wouldn't have had the opportunities I've had in life and been able to achieve what I'm fairly proud of without the teams that have been around me, and so helping to build those teams and watching them achieve is a
Wonderful.
fundamentally a great part of what I do.
Wonderful. So you have a great team. And so one follow-up question.
Yeah.
How do you sell your idea? Maybe to your team, maybe to your boss, or maybe to investors.
Right.
So you have a lot of idea, right? So sometimes it's a very innovative. People probably never heard about that one,
Yeah.
or they are not familiar with. How do you sell to convince them? As a startup, or as a CTO, there's a essential skill, right?
Yeah. Step one is evidence. And it goes back to that sort of hypothesis testing I was talking about before. So, a great idea on its own without having been able to test it at all is just an idea. And the great thing about software these days is how quickly you can build prototypes, how quickly you can get something in front of somebody, how quickly you get some sort of acknowledgement of the potential value of something. So that's key. Gain some evidence. That's the fundamental difference between my startup and working in a company like BlueCat. At my startup, I started with 0 customers. It was a startup.
Yeah.
And even to create the conversation to test ideas with a enterprise that has better things to do potentially than talk to some kid from Philadelphia, which I was at that point.
Yeah.
That on its own takes a lot of selling.
For sure.
How can I
To get their
a trusted
interest,
conversation?
right.
And why should they trust me, or why should they give me any sort of genuine opinion?
Right.
And so at a company like BlueCat, where I come in, where we have well over 1,000 customers that trust us, finding somebody to have that conversation with is way easier. The doors, I have a right to have that conversation. The door's open. They're invested in our success too,
Right.
which
you
is
can have
fantastic.
a lot of leverage on that. So.
Absolutely. And so, ensuring you have the networks so that you have trusted people that you can reach out to test any of those hypotheses, gain some evidence is critical in framing a great idea. And ensuring that it actually has some legs. And that's just not the technology side. It's also the commercial side and the market side of it. And so I'm usually have this internal battle between technology and market readiness and market value and what we can do or not. And
Right.
you sort of have to have both those sides. The best technology in the world without a market is not particularly interesting.
Right. So how did you find your first, the people want to listen to you? So you mentioned that it's especially when you start up, right? So it's very hard to get some people listen to, especially in a large organization. Do you have any trick or tips to get the first one? Or you just keep trying to get
No, yeah, and for sure. If you've gained some knowledge in an industry that you want to work in or build technology for, then that must have come from people that you've interacted with.
Right.
And so leveraging that network becomes critical.
Right.
In my personal case, when I was working for a large corporation after graduate school, I was implementing and customizing the software of a third party, and we were doing some pretty interesting things. So they were bringing other companies through as a reference customers, and each time they brought another company through, from my perspective, it was somebody to add to my network. There was no LinkedIn that I remember back then,
Right.
but there certainly was business cards and email addresses, and so it's important to harness those contacts, not in a way that's overbearing. Everybody has a day job, and not everybody wants to be your advisor. But when you have something of value that you want to discuss, then you need to make sure you have those contacts.
So which means even at your earlier stage of a career, or even during the university time, when you work on the project, you kind of need to develop your network.
Yeah.
So find some initial group of people you can talk to.
Yeah.
Right? So
for me, that wasn't a conscious goal.
Right.
It just sort of came as part of who I am. But today, in this day and age, there's between meetups and things at the University of Toronto, University of Waterloo, or any university at this point, there are opportunities to meet both the academic, commercial, and government sides on specific topics that might be of interest. and therefore opportunities to network and meet people,
Yeah.
and not in a overbearing way. You know, I get a lot of contacts from people who want advice without really having developed any point of view yet. You know,
Right,
and
yeah.
so I caution that you know, as you develop and strengthen these networks, leverage them when you have something material
Right.
to discuss.
Wonderful. So if I understand correctly, first of all, you need to have something unique for yourself, right? So some people can find a little bit of value from you, right? So
Right.
even at the beginning, it may not be that huge, but at least some value there. And also you kind of develop some network from day one,
Yeah.
and also learn from different perspectives. So
Yeah.
that will help you. Doesn't matter if eventually you want to become a CTO at a company or start your own business. That's very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm going to make one more point.
Mhm.
No, you didn't ask.
Right.
Which is, I see a lot of people shying away from situations that aren't optimal.
Okay.
And I think that there's something to learn in every situation.
Okay.
So, you know, if you want to learn the skills to navigate, you know, a complex workplace, for instance, or conflict that you don't necessarily have invited in your career, for instance, at this point, if you don't look at that as a learning opportunity, then it becomes very difficult to sell later, you know,
Right.
as you build up these, because
Right.
not everybody's going to be your champion.
Yeah.
You're going to deal with people that are prickly, that are political, that are whatever the case might be. And so shying away from dealing with those situations in your career doesn't prepare you for the reality
Yeah.
where there are prickly people. There are people that,
Sure.
that you know,
There are difficult people.
they're
as
difficult
well.
people to
Yeah.
work with. There are people that would rather leverage you to make themselves look better. There's people that aren't out for your best interests in the workplace.
Right.
Navigating that, all good skills to have. Just look at it as a learning opportunity.
Wonderful. I think you mentioned quite many important elements. So something like soft skills you need to build from day one. And also you need to have a positive attitude or right attitude.
Right.
There's a lot of challenges, but you view those challenges as learning opportunities. Convert that to grow yourself, right?
Right.
So and embrace the opportunity what's coming.
Yeah.
So don't refuse that and treat that as another learning opportunity for you. So
Yeah.
get prepared for the future big challenges.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful.